Matcap is short for material capture, and it captures the lighting and reflections in an environment. There are a few ways to create a matcap, but we'll get into what we're going to talk about here. So let's go ahead and go into the resources folder, and we're going to import. So this one I did a load tool, and we loaded the Kepler bust. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out of edit mode, Control N to clear my canvas, and I'll click the simple brush here, because if I have this selected and I go to import, it might replace that object in my subtools here with that object, so I don't want to do that. I'm going to import, and we're going to go to resources, and we're going to go to the resource folder, OBJ, Matcap Objects Tester, OBJ. We're going to go ahead and import this, drag it on our canvas, go into edit mode, and there we go. So now we're caught up. So these are just really simple forms here, and now what we need to do is go ahead and load up a material called Rgb Yw Testing Materials, Z material. There's a couple different ways you can load materials. The way we're going to do it right now is going in here, and you're going to want to choose a material that you're not going to use that much if you're going to, because what it's going to do is basically replace that material. So I'm going to go over here to like Matcap Sculpey 2, and then I'm going to go to my material palette here, and we're going to go to load under our resources and materials here. There is Rgb Yw Testing Matcap ZMT, and that's a Z material, Rgb Testing. So we'll load that up, and basically what that did was load up that material, and again, like I said, it replaced that material there, so be careful that you choose one that you're not going to use. Another alternative to that, if I hit the comma key here, and we go to the material folder, you're going to see I have some materials in here. So if I want those materials to be available to me when I hit comma, or any of his alphas or any of his textures in here, you can go into, let's go ahead and talk about that. Go into File Explorer here. We're going to go to ZBrush 4R8. So Program Files, Pixel Logic, ZBrush 4R8. And if we go to Z Materials here, I'm going to put a folder in here, new folder, and we're going to call this Comic Style Rendering. And then I'm going to go to my resources folder here, Streaming, Comic Rendering, Resources, and there's the material folder in here. So if I just copy these in here, now whenever I hit the comma key, and you go to material, you're going to see there's a comic style rendering folder in there, and then you can double click that, and then here is all your materials available to you. Here's the Rgb Yw testing that we're using now. So a couple different ways to do that. When we get into the alpha stuff, I'm going to copy those in there as well, just to kind of get a little alpha preview in there as we work. So I'm going to hit comma key to get rid of that light box there, and here we go. First thing I would like you to do is turn the perspective on and off, just so you can see the perspective doesn't affect how the materials are displayed. So as I rotate this thing around, if I hit P and toggle that on, it's not going to change how the materials react to the surface there. All right, and if we go over here to the Matcap, we have our material. So here's our material menu right here. If you scroll all the way down with that material selected, you're going to see there's a image in here, and it's 4 squares, super basic colors here, and that is what's driving the rendering, real-time rendering of these low resolution folder, or these low resolution objects right here. Now frame the objects and snap them to the front view. So as you're rotating, hold down Shift, and that'll snap them to the front view here, and then you can either hit this frame button over here or hit F, frame those here, and that'll kind of put those right smack dab in the center and make them fill up the canvas as we're working. Okay, so he's going to say pay attention to the left row while you slowly rotate the object, clicking and dragging up and down like this. So as we drag this object down, check out how the colors are changing. You see as I drag up, and then repeat the rotation, but this time keep your eye on the row on the right. What you'll see is that the transition colors is smoother on the right and more abrupt on the left. So as I'm dragging this up, you're going to see how they're kind of popping into view. So as I go, see how it goes pop, pop in between here. Right in this area is a really obvious one. As I'm rotating, it's really just having a harsh transition. And then over here, you're going to see it's actually having a pretty gradual, smooth transition between shapes. And over here is pretty obvious too. And this one isn't changing at all because I think it only has 4 sides. So we'll get to that in a bit. And the reason for this is the difference of amount of geometry in the object. So if we want to see that, what we can do is go over here to polyframe, and you're going to see, for example, this object right here just has a few polygons representing the shape, and then over here it has a ton of polygons representing that shape. So the more polygons you have, the smoother the transition is going to be as it's transferring between this blue and this red, for example, on the left-hand side. And okay, so what he says here is no matter how much we rotate the models, the blue and the green colors will always stay at the bottom and the red and yellow at the top. So the blue and the green are always at the bottom, no matter how we rotate these things around, or if we try and flip, turn upside down. And in fact, if we go hit W and we rotate these things around, see as I'm moving these things around, the blue is always in the lower left and the green is always in the lower right. Again, that's because this image down here is dictating how these things are colored. let's go ahead and go back to that Kepler model here. I'm just going to click that, and we'll go out of polyframe mode, and you can do just Shift F if you want to. And as we look at him, you're going to see the same thing is still true on a more complex object. You have all the upward left-facing red and all the upward right-facing yellow, and then green and blue at the bottom here. And these are based on the normal angles of all the individual little faces in this scene are dictating if they get red, blue, or green. And the center of the image is used by the Matcap where the four colors meet. Is actually the point that is facing the camera directly. So this spot right in here is dictating. So here you can see where they meet right there. That's what's facing the camera directly. So yeah, right here. And I don't have one that snaps directly to the middle, but if this was pointed straight forward, you would see these polygons right here are going to be where those things meet. All right, so now we're going to load up the Rgb Yw Testing Matcap Z material. So let's go back to our object here, hit F to frame, and then hold down Shift, and we'll snap this thing like so. And now instead of this material, now with this material loaded, I can just go ahead and replace that. Again, I'm going to hit my comma key. So we talked about copying those into this folder here. And let's check out Rgb Yw Testing. If I double click this, that's going to replace this material with this. And if I hit comma key, that'll get rid of it. And now you're going to see in this texture here, there is black in the middle. Now, when you import pure black into ZBrush, it'll give it transparency, as you can see here. But in this case, it's actually coloring the object here. And the only thing that happened, like I said, was this texture was replaced with a black circle in the middle of it there. And that is just to kind of show off, you know, when something is facing directly at the camera, it's going to inherit what's in the middle of this object. So you can kind of use this to shade as well. And you're going to notice up here in the upper left-hand corner, there is no black. You know, you can make this one, this face the camera, and it will inherit this black coloring there. But when we're straight on, there is no polygon that is straight facing the object or the camera here. So there is going to be no black on this particular object there. Rotate the object 180 degrees, and things are quite different. The pyramid now at the top right is just black because the base is a single polygon with a front normal. So if we rotate this all the way around, you're going to see because this base is just a flat normal that faces directly at us, it turns pure black. You can kind of see an outline over there. Let's see if we can hit BPR. Yeah, so you can kind of see a slight outline of those different colors from this side. But yeah, because these are just facing us, and even this flat one over, all these flat faces here are in an angle threshold low enough to where, because it's facing straight at us, all of this just turns black there. And then we'll go back to the Kepler character here. There we go. So now wherever the polygons are facing exactly at your camera, those are going to turn black. It's a pretty cool look. So now we're going to load in another testing material called Rgb Yw Testing. So let's go ahead and hit our comma key. And we'll go ahead and grab this Rgb W. And like you probably already guessed, this material, instead of having black in the middle, has white in the middle. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and we're now going to take a look at the two very important things for our comic book look. The first one is how to get the outlines that describe the volumes of the sculpture, and the second one is how to alter the range or depth of the Matcap. So make sure you turn off the polyframe, which we already have, and so this effect is more evident here. And one way we can achieve the outlines from the Matcap is by tweaking the cavity detection and cavity transition values. Intensity A and B are also relevant here. So let's change the cavity detection to 1, and you'll see that the colors are less bright and the outlines in the model are pure white. So here's cavity detection here. We're going to change this to 1, and as I drag this up, you're going to see what that's accomplishing. Like it says before, the colors are less bright, so it's desaturating the colors. It's adding a little bit of gray in there. And then it's also creating white along every single little polygon. Because this is a decimated mesh, you're going to see the triangulation in the model there. Cool. Cavity detection to 1. And if you want to invert this, we're going to change our cavity transition to 1. So if you take the cavity transition, it's at -1 by default. If we start dragging this towards 0, there is no, you're not getting a whole lot of polygon edges there. But if we take this to 1, now instead of white edges on our polygons, we're getting black edges on our polygons. So now we have some black outlines, but the colors are still a bit dull. So the black and white outlines and the less bright colors are determined by the same attribute, which is the color I chose for A and B right down here at the bottom of the modifier subpalette. So with cavity detection enabled with a value of more than 0, ZBrush is rendering the peaks or high points of the object with the color in channel A, and the cavities or low points of the color in channel B. And it's using those two colors to shade the material. So let's go ahead, let's see if we can't demonstrate this. So I'm going to go out of edit mode here. We'll go ahead and just grab a plane 3D, go into edit mode, make it a poly mesh, and we'll just go ahead and subdivide this up a few times. We're going to grab our Damien standard brush, so like B, D, S is Damien standard. And so now as I start sculpting with this, and if I turn to the side here, you're going to see it's actually grabbing this color as we move those face normals. But if we're snapped to the top here, you're going to see as I'm sculpting, and with the Damien standard, it's pushing down. If I hold down Alt, it'll pull up. So as I'm pulling down, if I'm holding down Alt, it's making it black, and as I sculpt it down, it's making it white. Those are the cavity transitions here. If you move the cavity transition slider back to -1, so cavity transition to -1, that'll inverse that effect. And it's not inverting the A and B colors, but it's smoothing or sharpening the transitions or peaks of the cavities black and white. In this case, you're actually inverting the transition between those two colors. So here's another example. So here's A and B are the simple gradient. So A is white, B is black, and it's the cavity transition is softening that transition between those two. If it's the cavity detection is not enabled, ZBrush will only take into account A sliders. So if we take cavity detection down to 0, it's only going to be the white slider here. We crank that up to 1. Now it's taking into account B, and you can kind of go between those. And then when you invert the values in the cavity transition here, so from -1 to +1 here, that's just flipping essentially the B and the A colors to another side that is transitioning between. So let's go back to the testing objects here. I'm going to go out of edit mode, control clear my canvas, drag this back out, go into edit mode, and snap this to the front, which we've already done here. Turn the intensity A all the way up to 5. There we go. And the cavity transition to 1. There we go. This is our original Matcap, and now we have black outlines. You can play around with the cavity detection. So basically, with that cavity detection all the way up, we're getting black outlines. If we do cavity detection down to 0, it's just going to be black. So as you crank this up, you're getting more and more harsh lines wherever you have polygons. So you can see over here, we're getting harsh lines. Everywhere we have a lot of polygons on really simple objects, we're just getting basically an outline of our object there. You can play around with the cavity detection and cavity transition values to tweak the amount of lines and thickness on the outlines. Now that you know the color and the outlines are determined by the B channel, which is this color right down here, the black, you can simply change the B color to something else to get a different color. So if we click this B and we make this red, now we're getting red lines being drawn. If we click B and we change it to blue, we can change it to like a lighter gray or a darker gray or even a white if we want to. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this black here. Next thing I want to show you is the depth A and depth B. The easy way to understand the practicality of these attributes is to see it as a pinch and a magnify. So let's go ahead and do that a little bit. There we go. So as we change this depth A right here, watch this Matcap here. So as you change that depth A, you're going to see, I'm sorry, don't watch this Matcap. Watch the resulting image over here in the brush palette. So as I change this depth A over here, see how that white dot gets smaller? And then as I go back down, it gets back to the original size here. If I do 0, and then if I crank this down to negative, it makes the white really big, and then it goes back down to smaller. So basically what it's doing, if we do 3.5, it's creating this, it's pinching your texture, which is having the result of making this white dot smaller. I'm at 0, it goes back to normal, and then magnify at 0.8. So let's go ahead and do 0.8. There we go. So now it's magnifying, it's bubbling out the center of your texture to make the white a little bit more apparent here. And here you see some examples of 4 is really small, 0.5 is really big, and then anything in between those. You're going to notice when it goes to negative here, it flips the Matcap image. So as I go to a negative depth, so see how we have red in the upper left? As I go to negative, green's going to be in the upper left. So it flips the colors and then does your white spot bigger or smaller. And if you want to look at that on the Kepler guy, let's go ahead and load him up. And now we can do our depth A as we get bigger. There's the white getting smaller, and then it's getting bigger, and then it flips as we go negative and then gets bigger and smaller.